Winter, 1823. The season had descended upon the frozen territories with its customary brutality, transforming the landscape into something altogether otherworldly. A band of fur traders, their sledges laden with goods of considerable value, pushed steadily northward to the vast expanse of frozen rivers. The dogs, their breath crystallizing instantly in the bitter air, pulled with determined effort against the relentless cold. Life in these remote regions was notoriously harsh, yet it was a harshness to which the traders had grown accustomed, or so they believed. But as the expedition ventured deeper into the unforgiving wilderness, signs began to manifest themselves. Bark stripped impossibly high from the towering trees, bones scraped clean with methodical precision, a cry echoing through the timber, a sound that no man present could adequately identify or comprehend. At night, the smell came first, a foul, sour stench that would curl through the camp, setting the dogs to frantic whining. Then came the footsteps, circling the fire with patient, deliberate intent. In the profound silence of the frozen north, something hunted them, something gaunt with hunger, something ancient and patient. And before their harrowing journey reached its conclusion, these 5 men would discover precisely why the stories of the Wendigo were spoken only in hushed, reverent whispers, even amongst the hardened voyagers who frequented the trading posts. The river stretched before us like a road of gleaming ice when we pushed north from the company post in late November. The sky maintained a peculiar, pale luminescence that remained remarkably constant from early morning until late afternoon, a phenomenon that never quite ceased to unsettle those unfamiliar with these northern latitudes. The cold, however, was anything but constant. It was a living, predatory force that settled upon the skin and penetrated deep into the joints, a relentless adversary that sapped warmth and will with equal measure. Our sleds creaked persistently behind the dogs, and our snowshoes hissed against the crystalline crust of the snow with each methodical step. I was but 21 years of age, embarking upon my second winter in the employ of the Hudson's Bay Company. The work suited me, if one could claim that frozen labor and perpetual discomfort constituted something to which one might become suited. I maintained the account ledger and assisted in hauling the sleds when the terrain proved particularly challenging. Our expedition carried trade goods intended for the spring trading rounds and a substantial packet of letters destined for a remote outpost at Pike Lake, situated far to the north. Our party consisted of 5 men, each selected for particular competencies required in this demanding environment. Matthew served as our leader, a man whose appearance was marked by a notably thick beard that grew unevenly across the scarring of an old burn wound. He communicated in terse phrases that somehow managed to carry considerable authority across the howling wind. Kerr, our clerk, was considerably senior to the rest of us and maintained an almost obsessive vigilance over the letter packets. I had served as his assistant throughout the previous year, and had come to appreciate both his meticulous attention to detail and his occasionally unsettling silences. Jules handled the second sledge with certain rakish charm, forever teasing the dogs when they showed signs of fatigue or reluctance. Wappin, our hunting guide, was an older gentleman possessed of a patience that never manifested itself as sluggishness. He addressed the dogs in his native tongue, a language none of us comprehended, and communicated with us in measured Creek and French. We had collectively adopted the practice of employing only the most essential vocabulary, words that facilitated our work without encouraging unnecessary conversation. Before our departure, the postmaster had issued stern warnings about the perils of thin ice in the narrower bends of the river and the danger posed by wolves that prowled the timber. Yet, if truth be told, our primary concern was neither ice nor predatory animals, but rather the specter of starvation. We carried flour, dried peas, and a substantial barrel of rendered fat. Our survival, however, would ultimately depend upon locating caribou near the extensive lakes that dotted this northern territory. The opening week of our journey proceeded without significant incident. We departed before dawn each day, consuming cold bannock during our brief halts, and consistently reached suitable spruce groves well before mid-afternoon. We would fell branches to construct a ground covering, erect our canvas shelter, and collect sufficient kindling for the evening fires. The dogs would curl into tight balls, their tails drawn across their noses for protection. My hands developed deep cracks at the knuckles from the constant exposure to brutal cold. Each evening, I recorded observations in my ledger by the light of our fire, watching my breath rise in short bursts whilst the ink gradually thickened in extreme cold, rendering progressively more difficult to achieve legible script. The work was monotonous, yet possessed a certain meditative quality that made the endless hours somewhat more bearable. On the 10th day of our expedition, we reached a sprawling expanse of low rock formations and sparse scrub vegetation, a location where the river broadened considerably and its pace diminished noticeably. The ice possessed a dull, uninteresting appearance, its surface pitted with small depressions. Waupun approached it with his testing pole, advancing cautiously before gesturing for us to proceed. Jules' sledge groaned as it traversed a seam in the ice, and momentarily, the rear runners penetrated slightly into the surface below. The dogs, however, maintained their forward progress, and we kept our collective attention fixed upon the distant far bank. Upon reaching genuinely solid ice, Matthew called for a respite. He observed that the dogs required additional fat for their sustenance, as did we ourselves. We carved thin slices from our barrel and allowed them to dissolve upon our tongues, experiencing the genuine relief as warmth gradually permeated our chests in a steady, sustaining manner. That evening, the wind intensified considerably, pushing through the spruce forest and producing a prolonged, uniform sound. We had established our canvas shelter and maintained a substantial bed of coals, yet the cold persisted in penetrating every available opening. I woke twice during the night to add fuel to the fire. Before dawn, the dogs commenced restless movement and whining, not loudly, but with perceptible anxiety that set one's nerves on edge. I ventured out to examine them, and observed nothing moving in the darkness. The sky presented a low haze, and a faint ring had formed around the moon. Frost had accumulated along the rope lines securing the animals. When I turned to survey the camp, I observed Waupun already awake, seated at the periphery of the firelight with his blanket drawn across his shoulders. His gaze remained fixed upon the darkness, his facial features entirely composed, as though he were carefully weighing something of considerable importance. Without discussion, we broke camp before the sun had touched the highest treetops. The snow's surface had acquired a hard crust that initially supported our weight, but subsequently gave way beneath each second step, rendering the work extraordinarily fatiguing. We traversed a narrow valley where the river bent and split around a substantial line of rocks. It was there that we discovered something that most decidedly should not have existed in this location. The snow surrounding an old fire ring had been thoroughly churned and disrupted. Bones lay scattered across the frozen ground. Not fresh bones from a recent kill, but rather ones that bore the marks of extended use. They had been cracked open and meticulously scraped. The marrow cavity within each bone was entirely hollow, clean with unmistakable purpose. Kerr crouched and prodded one with his mittened hand, observing that someone had subjected these bones to poor treatment. Waupun remained characteristically silent initially. He conducted a thorough search of the area before directing our collective attention to a birch sapling situated near the clearing's edge. The bark had been torn away in long strips that extended considerably higher than any man's shoulder could possibly reach. The exposed beneath bore evidence of gouging, marks that were notably deep and irregular. We engaged in heated debate regarding the significance of these findings. Jules suggested that wolves possess the capacity to achieve considerable heights in their leaps. I advanced the theory that a bear, perhaps during an autumn ramble before hibernation, might have inflicted such damage. Matthew shook his head dismissively, contending that a bear would produce entirely different markings and would necessarily be in its winter sleep at this season. Waupun issued a command, simple yet authoritative, that we depart from this place immediately. He did not elevate his voice, yet his tone possessed a penetrating quality that effectively silenced our continued speculation. We departed without consuming our midday meal. For 2 hours we proceeded at an accelerated pace before halting merely to drink. The atmosphere seemed somehow compressed, as though the surrounding forest pressed inward upon us with intentional malice. The trail displayed evidence of ancient caribou prints and several fresher ones extending toward the eastern horizon. We pursued these more recent tracks until they veered away toward rising terrain that our laden sledges could not traverse. The dogs exhibited sharp interest in the fresh trail, pulling insistently against their traces, before they eventually settled when we persisted in our original direction. That afternoon, an unsettling sound emerged from the timber to our right. It was decidedly not the howl of a wolf, nor was it any avian cry I had previously encountered. The noise commenced at a considerable height and sustained that pitch before descending abruptly into a harsh, discordant note. The dogs ceased their progress and oriented their attention toward the trees. Jules released profanity and commanded them to continue forward. I observed Kerr's jaw becoming noticeably tense. He addressed Matthew, suggesting that we ought to endeavor to reach the subsequent lake before establishing camp for the evening. Wappen stood perfectly still until the disturbing sound had completely faded away. He then instructed us to maintain our proximity to the open areas where the river would permit such positioning. He offered no clarification for this directive, and I recognized instinctively that inquiring further would be imprudent. We achieved the lake as daylight diminished. The surface appeared genuinely secure beneath our examination. We proceeded to a small spruce island to take advantage of its wind protection properties. We constructed 2 modest fires rather than a single larger one, a technique that distributed heat more consistently and dispersed the smoke over a wider area. Wappen positioned small snares for rabbits in the dense brush, creating quick loops within the narrow animal runs. The remainder of us undertook the labor of melting snow and preparing a substantial pea soup enriched with rendered fat. During our meal, conversation remained minimal. The sound we had encountered seemed to have settled into our collective consciousness, weighing upon us more substantially than any physical burden. I attempted to redirect my thoughts toward correspondence from home that might arrive during the spring thaw, yet my mind persistently returned to the image of that torn bark and the disturbingly clean marrow cavities. Upon finishing our supper, I walked out onto a frozen lake with my coat fastened securely and my scarf crossed and tucked beneath my chin. I sought a moment of solitude, a brief respite from the constant proximity of the fires. The night extended in every direction with remarkable clarity. The sky was unobstructed and possessed a crystalline hardness that seemed to exclude any possibility of warmth or mercy. I heard a thin crack propagate beneath the ice, a sound that subsequently ceased abruptly. Looking back toward our campsite, I observed the 2 fires as steady points of light with our canvas shelter rising behind them. It was on the far side of the lake, beyond our sledges, that I detected movement. A shape crossed the boundary between the shadow of a spruce and the open shoreline, then ceased moving entirely. The figure stood upright. That was the sole detail I could ascertain with certainty. It remained perfectly motionless. I stood, counting silently to 20, my mouth having gone decidedly dry. I walked back to camp without allowing myself to run, though I confess the temptation was considerable. I conveyed what I had observed to Matthew. He called for absolute silence and inquired precisely where the figure had been positioned. By that juncture, the shape had vanished completely from view. We stood assembled together, maintaining a vigilant watch upon the shoreline's far edge. The dogs commenced shuffling movements and produced low vocalizations from deep within their throats. Kerr suggested that it could potentially be a man. Jules countered that a starving human would presumably be crawling desperately toward our fire rather than maintaining a solitary vigil in the darkness. Wappen listened to our exchange and subsequently spoke in a deliberately measured manner, observing that certain things possess a capacity to observe and wait. He uttered a name in his native language and subsequently provided us with a word we recognized. Wendigo, he said simply, as though announcing the weather forecast. None of us offered a response for an extended period. Eventually, Kerr spoke, advancing the theory that we were exhausted and that the stripped bark merely indicated hunger rather than anything of a supernatural nature. He articulated this with deliberate care, maintaining a steady vocal tone. Matthew nodded in agreement and announced that we would establish paired watch rotations throughout the night. He positioned Jules and me for the initial watch, instructing us to maintain the fires at adequate levels and to keep our firearms at the ready. The dogs eventually settled into their customary circles, but did not achieve any profound depth of slumber. Their ears would lift and drop repeatedly as though responding to sounds imperceptible to human perception. Jules and I maintained our positions at the camp's perimeter throughout our initial watch. The cold caused my cheeks to sting with considerable intensity. Above us, the stars executed their slow rotation against a black canopy of spruce trees. Occasionally, We heard the ice produce its settling sounds. Branches would crack from extreme cold. Yet, we did not hear the cry return. Jules attempted conversation regarding fish populations near the trading post and a young woman near the fort who purchased cloth from the company store, but his words drifted desultorily and eventually ceased altogether. He maintained his mittened hand upon the rifle stock throughout our watch, a gesture that required no verbal explanation. When our turn concluded, I reclined and closed my eyes, though genuine sleep proved elusive. I existed in a state of half-awareness, neither fully asleep nor genuinely alert. I woke to footsteps approaching my position and instinctively reached for my rifle, only to recognize Matthew carrying additional fuel to fire. He acknowledged me with a simple nod, and I repositioned myself for another unsuccessful attempt at rest. The smell reached me then, initially quite faint, discernible only as something formed beneath with smoke and rendered fat. It carried a decidedly sour, stale quality. It originated from the darkness beyond where the dogs remained tethered. I achieved complete wakefulness immediately. I rose and observed that Wappen was already standing. Notably, he held no firearm in his hand. His snowshoes had already been secured to his feet. He proceeded toward the source of the odor in a direct, silent line and halted approximately 10 paces beyond the dogs. He bent and examined the snow carefully. When he straightened, his gaze passed from me to Matthew. He offered no verbal commentary whatsoever. He simply walked back to the fire and seated himself, his expression revealing nothing. The smell gradually diminished, and the night resumed its previous quietude. We broke camp at first light, proceeding in near total silence. The dogs exhibited none of their customary sluggishness, instead pulling with evident eagerness to move away from that location. The daylight hours brought increasingly severe cold. Frost accumulated on our beards and scarves, forming a hard crust. We achieved considerable distance before finally halting near midday, consuming merely water and a handful of bannock. In the afternoon hours, we encountered a line of tracks that crossed a river and proceeded into the timber on the distant bank. The stride was notably extended. The individual prints lacked sufficient clarity for definitive identification, yet they possessed none of the characteristics of moose or human footprints as we recognized them. We conducted our speculative analysis, though our theories sounded distinctly hollow when articulated aloud. Wappen instructed us to maintain our forward progress at a steady pace. He drew himself to full height and assumed the lead position. None of us offered any contradiction whatsoever. We sustained a vigorous pace throughout the afternoon hours, proceeding along an extended, straight section of river that cut between modest hills. The wind pressed downward against the track, maintaining the surface relatively free of accumulated snow. Our verbal communication diminished to almost nothing. I maintained constant observation of Wappen's parka and the rhythmic movement of his testing pole. Kurt walked with his head lowered, as though listening to either the ice beneath us or to his own internal ruminations. Jules frequently glanced behind us in a manner that caused evident nervousness in the dogs. Matthew, meanwhile, drove the lead sledge with sharp, efficient commands that maintained his team in proper formation. As evening approached, the sky transformed. A band of cloud accumulated from the western horizon, dark at its base and moving with deliberate slowness. The air became extraordinarily still, a phenomenon I found distinctly disquieting. We pushed toward a stand of spruce position upon a rise above the river, reasoning that we would secure adequate dry fuel should the weather deteriorate significantly. The ascent from the ice required considerable labor, with teams required to haul each sledge individually. The runners scraped harshly, and the dogs dug their claws into the snow with visible determination. By the time we had positioned the second sledge, the wind had shifted and commenced dropping fine crystalline particles that stung exposed facial skin. We established a compact camp on the lee side of the rise, constructing deep piles of spruce boughs for insulation. Matthew instructed us to establish a third modest fire specifically to accelerate the drying of our mittens and stockings. We consumed our evening meal early and sparingly, recognizing that the day's demanding exertion had extracted more from the dogs than we had prudently anticipated. The snow commenced falling with considerable intensity after darkness descended. It fell vertically initially before rotating with a strengthening wind and sweeping horizontally across the ground. The fires maintained steady but diminished flames. We positioned our canvas covering with exceptional tightness and secured every possible edge. I ventured out to examine the dogs and found them curled within hollows they had excavated, their noses tucked beneath their tails. Their bodies trembled periodically, though I recognized this as a response to the extreme cold rather than manifestations of fear. Upon returning to the fire, I discovered Kerr staring intensely at the flames, his hands extended toward the warmth. He looked toward me and made a peculiar observation, commenting that he experienced the ground beneath him rising and falling, as though a distant drum beat were passing through the earth. He inquired whether I perceived this phenomenon. I replied that I did not experience any such sensation. He rubbed his wrists and made a rather strange comment regarding dreams of summer grass. He subsequently shook his head and adjusted a log in the fire. The night proved extraordinarily lengthy. I drifted in and out of consciousness, measuring the passage of time by observing how the heat dissipated from my front, whilst the cold gradually crept into my back. Approaching midnight, the wind diminished sufficiently that its absence became notably conspicuous. I heard the snow settle from our canvas covering and the small crystalline sounds of ice forming at the kettle's edges. Then, quite abruptly, the dogs ceased all movement simultaneously. That quietude possessed a quality that transcended mere silence and prompted me to sit upright. I could discern the smoke from our boiled cloth, and beneath it, that same sour odor we had encountered the previous evening. I nudged Jules with my boot and observed that his eyes were already open and alert. Without verbal communication, he lifted his rifle. Matthew conducted a perimeter examination and located nothing in close proximity. He woke Wappin, who rose and stood with his blanket across his shoulders, gazing past us into the darkness beyond the dogs. After an extended period of observation, he instructed us in a deliberately composed voice to draw the food sacks into our canvas covering and to position the fat barrel closer to the fire. He stated flatly that we would incinerate the bones from the preceding 2 days and bury the ash in clean snow. We executed these tasks, though the labor felt peculiarly transgressive when conducted during darkness whilst a storm raged around us. Nevertheless, the practical work provided a welcome steadying effect for our troubled minds. The smell in the air seemed to diminish. Subsequent to completing these preparations, we maintained a small lamp burning near the sack, a precaution we had not previously undertaken. Sleep returned only in fragmented pieces. By morning, the sky had cleared entirely, and the air possessed a sharp, penetrating quality. The world spread before us with remarkable definition, every line etched with absolute clarity. In certain locations, drifts had accumulated to knee height. We excavated the sledges, distributed a generous ration to the dogs, and vacated the camp with maximum efficiency given the brutal cold. Upon reaching the river, we observed that the snow had obliterated our previous trail, and the wind had created small wave-like formations across the ice surface. We proceeded in single file, breaking a new path. Following approximately 1 hour of travel, we discovered that our previous day's passage had not been as vacant as it had appeared. Tracks extended parallel to our original trail, occasionally converging closely and at other intervals maintaining considerable distance. They had crossed our line on 2 separate occasions, notably near a location where we had paused for water consumption. The stride between individual prints was notably extended and irregular, suggesting a pattern of locomotion wherein the maker would lope, subsequently pause, and then resume movement. None of us articulated any verbal observations for a considerable duration. Approaching midday, we reached a narrowing section where the river constricted between substantial ridges. The water below the ice moved with considerable velocity, and the surface possessed a distinctly hollow quality when tested with the pole. We desired to circumnavigate the bend, yet the banks proved too precipitous to ascend with laden sledges. We distributed ourselves to diminish the weight concentrated upon any single location and attached a rope connecting the lead sledge to the secondary one, establishing the capacity to conduct a combined haul if one should begin to fail. We had advanced merely 5 paces into this treacherous section when the ice shifted. A crack propagated from the left bank to the right, with an audible report that echoed across the frozen expanse. The lead sledge's front runner plunged through. The dogs scrambled and clawed desperately. Matthew shouted for us to maintain our position. The secondary sledge pulled backward, and the connecting rope achieved extreme tension. For one horrifying moment, it appeared the entire team would slide into the dark water below. Then the lead runner scraped upward, and the sledge re-established its position upon solid ice. We dragged both sledges toward the distant bank at an accelerated pace, our breath burning in our lungs, our legs growing progressively heavier. Only upon achieving solid ground did we observe that the lashings had loosened and one food sack had slipped away, disappearing beneath the ice. We conducted a comprehensive inventory. We had forfeited half a sack of flour and various small goods that had been wrapped with it. The fat barrel remained intact. The letters were safe, which produced visible relief upon Kerr's features. The loss tightened our margin considerably. Matthew stated that we would require locating caribou within a reasonable time frame or risk being compelled to reduce our rations in a manner that would compromise our forward progress. Wappen observed that caribou would maintain proximity to the larger lakes, where wind action created hard crust conducive to their feeding. He indicated a trajectory toward such a lake located to the northeast. His words carried an air of casual confidence, yet I perceived him directing more frequent glances toward the distant tree-line. We established camp relatively early that day, utilizing the daylight hours to dry the sledge equipment and verify that every lashing had been properly secured. We selected a small hollow containing willow scrub, poor fuel but adequate shelter. Jules positioned snares at strategic locations. I carved thin curls from a spruce not to facilitate fire starting. Kerr, who harbored an aversion to minor tasks, collected substantial armfuls of the lightweight willow branches we could snap by hand. As darkness approached, the dogs stiffened simultaneously and oriented their attention toward the ridge to the south. Their heads descended low. Their bodies assumed the posture of animals directing their focus toward game, though no sound emerged. I walked approximately 20 paces outward and discerned nothing. The snow displayed only the patterns created by wind action. I remained in position for an extended period, attempting to perceive sounds beyond the rasp of my own respiration. There was no cry, no cracking of branches, no footfall of a substantial creature through the brush. I returned to the fire and maintained absolute silence regarding this observation, a decision that haunted me throughout the remainder of the evening. We consumed a thin soup and dry bannock. Nobody expressed satisfaction with this repast. I found myself contemplating the missing provisions, not in terms of weight or arithmetic calculation, but rather as a void that the cold would attempt to fill with our collective strength. This thought produced anger of a particularly objectless variety, and I observed myself carefully to ensure such despair did not overwhelm my rational faculties. Kerr withdrew the letter packets and examined the seals once more, a habit he performed whenever requiring mental stabilization. He communicated in low tones that one packet was destined for a gentleman at Pike Lake who had lost a son to fever. There was nothing merciful in what we carried, yet it remained necessary. Following our meal, Matthew established a watch rotation once more, this occasion with pairs, but utilizing shortened intervals. He reasoned that the storm and river crossing had depleted our reserves sufficiently to render longer watches inadvisable. He positioned me with him for the initial rotation. We stood facing the ridge where the dogs had fixed their earlier attention. The moon ascended late and provided minimal illumination. The night progressed through minute variations. Snow drifted gradually. The fire hissed when sap bled from a split log. I heard my own pulse in my ears with uncomfortable clarity. The initial hour transpired without noteworthy incident. I perceived a gradual diminution of the tension that had accumulated in my shoulders. Then the smell returned, intensified considerably from its previous manifestations. It carried the quality of aged meat and decomposition, combined with faint sour note reminiscent of hides left stacked in damp conditions. It emerged from the ridge's direction, rolled across our camp, and failed to dissipate. The dogs leaned backward against their lines and commenced producing low vocalizations from deep within their throats. Matthew raised his hand, and we maintained absolute stillness. I detected the hair on my arms rising despite the extreme cold, which rendered normal skin sensation nearly impossible. We maintained our positions in complete silence. The smell did not move. Kerr woke without receiving any call and approached us with his eyes notably widened and his breathing elevated. Jules positioned himself behind us with his rifle at his shoulder, whilst Wappen advanced ahead of us without excessive haste, raising his hand in a cautionary gesture. He articulated several words in his native language, not loudly, but in a manner suggesting simple greeting. As though addressing someone at a doorway, he stood with his arms positioned at his sides. He articulated another brief phrase and waited. The ridge offered no response. The smell commenced gradually diminishing. We maintained our positions until our scheduled watch concluded. When I reclined, I did not achieve sleep. I observed the canvas ripple at its base where wind discovered gaps, and I executed a slow mental counting exercise to facilitate the passage of time. I heard footsteps in the snow, neither approaching closely nor remaining distant. They proceeded along the camp's periphery and subsequently advanced toward the river. I elevated my head and perceived Wappen already awake. His eyes open and following the sound without any physical movement. He did not direct his attention toward me. He offered no commentary. When the footsteps faded completely, he closed his eyes, though I harbor considerable doubt regarding whether genuine sleep followed. We commenced our departure before first light. The cold possessed a particularly severe character that morning, rendering speech unnecessarily brief and the dogs tense within their harnesses. We ascended from a hollow and proceeded along a shallow valley in the direction Wappen had identified. Following approximately 1 hour, the landscape opened, the trees diminishing considerably, and the wind struck us from the lateral direction. The snow in this location was less substantial and possessed a harder crust, permitting the sledges to traverse the terrain more efficiently. We achieved significant progress. Around midday, we encountered fresh caribou tracks, 2 animals progressing northward. We increased our pace, and the dogs elevated their heads and pulled with renewed determination. We crested a modest elevation and perceived the promised lake ahead, extensive and wide, with a distant shoreline displaying mixed spruce and jack pine forest. Slender snow formations snaked across the ice surface. We directed our course toward a small point on the adjacent shore, where wind would provide shelter and afforded excellent visibility. We established our position with considerable speed and maintained the sledges in place. Wappen selected Jules and myself for a snowshoe reconnaissance to pursue the caribou path along the perimeter. Matthew remained with Kerr to address the dogs and camp maintenance. We progressed slowly, positioning each subsequent footprint precisely within preceding one to preserve our energy reserves. The tracks extended along a low band of willow vegetation before cutting across a shallow bay. We observed the pair feeding amongst exposed lichen on a ridge beyond the bay, their heads descended, their tails steady. The wind direction favored our approach. We advanced through concluding distance in a crouched posture and remained perfectly motionless until the animals elevated their heads and rotated their attention. When they resumed feeding, we rose and advanced in a low crouch to further narrow the distance. A rifle discharged with sharp report. Jules had achieved a clean shot penetrating the lungs. The second animal bolted and accelerated along the ridge. I discharged my weapon and missed high. It pivoted, paused briefly, and Jules fired again, a projectile passing through the shoulder. The animal stumbled and collapsed. We stood in the snow and respired deeply without vocalizing our relief. We proceeded to the animals and executed what was necessary with expeditious precision and no unnecessary delay. Blood steamed against the white snow. We operated with knives that felt awkward within our rigid fingers. We selected what could be transported and abandoned what exceeded our carrying capacity. We covered the remains with clean snow to discourage ravens from broadcasting the location across the sky. Upon the ridge situated above where the second animal had fallen, I discovered bark torn away from a pine tree. The gouges were notably profound. The elevation was entirely inconsistent with any creature we recognized. I directed Wappen's attention to the discovery. He examined it with considerable attention for an extended duration before instructing us simply to gather and proceed. His facial features revealed nothing whatsoever, yet his vocal tone communicated absolute conviction. We transported the meat to camp with concentrated effort and offered no commentary regarding the peculiar tree. The dogs perceived the blood well, before we reached the camp perimeter. They barked insistently and pulled with considerable force against their restraints. Their visual focus fixed upon the sledges, as though they could not sustain their patience an additional moment. Kerr attempted to calm them, though his voice produced minimal effect. Matthew emerged from the fire location with his rifle in hand, before subsequently lowering it upon recognizing us hauling the loads. The relief manifest upon his visage was transparent. Food represented days, possibly weeks, of security from starvation. We arranged the meat upon canvas and packed snow around it to retard the freezing process. The aroma rose to the camp, powerful and compelling, mingling with smoke and rendered fat until the scent seemed to permeate every layer of our clothing. That evening, we consumed substantially more than we had in preceding days. Wappen prepared meat strips in a kettle with fat, and the dogs consumed their portions until they reclined in a collective heap, their abdomens distended, their eyes closed. For the first instance in days, none of us measured his ration with nervous calculation. Kurt even produced a laugh, a dry sound, when Jules inadvertently spilled a cup of broth upon his footwear and responded with creative profanity regarding the burn. The warmth distributed through me steadily and with considerable strength. Nevertheless, I could not wholly dismiss the image of that torn bark above the ridge. I anticipated Wappen would address this discovery, yet he never did. He remained positioned close to the fire with his hands upon his knees, regarding the flames as though interpreting something encoded within them. We positioned no snares that evening. The meat provided sufficient sustenance. Watches continued according to standard practice, and I undertook the second rotation with Kerr. The air remained static, disturbed only by a faint hissing as snow drifted from the pine branches. The lake extended dark and extensively, the ice groaning periodically as though the weight of the cold itself pressed downward with relentless force. Kerr held his rifle across his knees and maintained frequent glances toward the shadows beyond the firelight. He addressed me regarding the tracks we had observed days prior, those that were neither moose nor characteristically human. I provided a response of absolute truthfulness. I did not possess an adequate explanation. He nodded as though this reply was entirely expected and commented that the smell we had noticed manifested itself more intensely within his dreams. I inquired what precisely he intended by this observation. He declined to provide clarification, merely redirecting his gaze toward the darkness. Our watch progressed without sound or disturbance. Following the morning, the sky presented pale and cloudless qualities, and the atmosphere cut with glass-like clarity. We distributed feed to the dogs and completed our camp procedures with exceptional speed, interring the bones and dispersing the ash widely. The dogs demonstrated remarkable vigor following their complete meal, their movement smooth, their respiration evident as white plumes. We achieved considerable distance across the lake and approached the distant shore well before the midday hour. From that location, the terrain ascended in ridges that guided our direction northward. Wappen indicated that a valley would facilitate a shortened travel duration of multiple days. Matthew concurred, though the landscape appeared dense and heavily forested with spruce. We descended into the valley and discovered the snow to be notably profound, the air static, the trees positioned with uncomfortable proximity. The day proceeded slowly. The sledges encountered obstacles from concealed roots, and the runners dragged persistently. The men articulated low curses beneath their respiration. I experienced sweat freezing upon my shirt as I labored. In the afternoon hours, we encountered a hollow where the snow had been churned into extensive circular patterns. The ground bore impressions consisting of enormous prints, each extending the full length of my arm. The adjacent trees have been stripped of bark to considerable heights and beyond. Certain branches have been torn away entirely. We stood together in profound silence for an extended duration, each man regarding the devastation before us. The dogs whimpered and pressed against the sledges. Jules released a profanity and projected saliva, though his facial coloration had become distinctly pale. Kerr rotated slowly in a complete circuit, rifle in hand. Wappen bent, examined the snow, and subsequently straightened. He stated in an untroubled voice that we would proceed around this location. His words communicated no possibility for discussion. We ascended the ridge and circumnavigated the hollow. From the summit, I directed my attention downward once more and perceived that certain footprints crossed one another, as though whatever had created them had circled in profound confusion or uncontrolled rage. I considered the possibility of a bear, yet bears maintain deep hibernation throughout winter seasons. The shape of the marks was fundamentally incorrect. The distance separating each stride exceeded what I could rationally comprehend. My digestive system contracted with cold despite the perspiration still evaporating upon me. That evening, we established camp upon elevated ground. The wind reached us in that location, yet Matthew reasoned that this position was superior to being confined within the low valley's constricted space. We secured the dogs in close proximity, constructed a fire upon a flat stone, and consumed our meal in complete silence. The meat carried a powerful flavor, yet it represented the singular substance that provided genuine sustenance. The night descended with remarkable speed, shadows ascending the slope, the cold intensifying until our respiration froze with substantial thickness upon our scarves. I remained awake following my watch rotation, listening intently. I perceived the fires hissing, the dogs' shuffling movements, the wind's pressure upon the canvas. Subsequently, beneath these familiar sounds, I detected something distinct. That identical prolonged cry we had encountered days previously. It extended across the ridge, elevated and attenuated, before descending into a sound that caused my teeth to grind together involuntarily. The dogs rose as a unified entity, snapping at their restraints. The men sat upright simultaneously, rifles in hand. No individual articulated any verbal communication. The cry emerged again, now positioned considerably closer, before ceasing abruptly. The silence that followed proved substantially worse than the sound itself. We maintained our positions, every individual frozen in place, the fire projecting light that felt inadequate against the encompassing darkness. Minutes accumulated, then expanded further. Gradually, the dogs settled, though their bodies remained tense, their visual attention fixed upon the ridge. The smell reached us shortly thereafter, rolling through camp with considerable density and sour quality, catching unpleasantly in the throat's posterior region. I elevated my scarf to a higher position and perceived my hands trembling noticeably against my rifle stock. Waupin positioned himself at the firelight's periphery, his head inclined as though perceiving something positioned just beyond the threshold of auditory comprehension. Subsequently, he articulated words barely audible above a whisper, instructing us that we should not repeat that particular name again. He directed us merely to sustain the fires and to ensure our preparation for the morning's departure. None of us achieved satisfactory sleep. When dawn arrived, pale and featureless, we completed our packing with considerable haste. The valley opened into an extensive plain scattered with willow vegetation and exposed rock formations. The snow in this location was less substantial, and the sledges progressed with improved efficiency. Yet the dogs maintained constant rearward glances. They exhibited restlessness, their ears twitching in response to sounds I could not detect. By midday, the wind intensified again, dispersing snow across the open plain. The world transformed into white, shifting emptiness. We proceeded in close proximity, each individual maintaining visual contact with the man positioned ahead. I thought I observed shapes shifting through the storm on multiple occasions, figures that were tall and attenuated. However, when I blinked deliberately, they had vanished. We discovered shelter that evening in the lee of a substantial cliff face. The stone rose perpendicularly, black against the surrounding whiteness, and deflected the wind with sufficient effectiveness to permit the establishment of a steady fire. The cliff displayed cracks of considerable width capable of retaining snow, and icicles extended like elongated knives from the ledge positions. We harvested branches and constructed a resting area positioned against the wall. The fire burned with bright intensity. The dogs remained in close proximity. Temporarily, I believed that the stone might offer us protection. Subsequently, I observed marks positioned near the cliff's base. They consisted of gouges, profound and irregular, carved with unmistakable intent into the rock itself. The elevation exceeded anything achievable by any implement within my reach, the width incompatible with any animal claw I recognized. My digestive system contracted, and I directed my gaze away. I communicated nothing to the remaining individuals. Yet I recognized absolutely that Wappen had observed him equally, as he declined to position himself adjacent to the fire that evening. Instead, he stationed himself with his back against the cliff, confronting the white darkness extending beyond. The fire maintained minimal intensity that night, and every man retreated into his individual thoughts. The cliff provided protection from the wind, yet the cold persisted in advancing inward. The smell emerged again before the midnight hour, advancing through camp in progressive waves. This iteration proved substantially heavier, resembling the interior of a carcass subjected to extended decomposition. The dogs rose and growled, their fur bristling, their teeth exposed toward the open plain. Kerr articulated prayers beneath his respiration. Jules tightened the restraint securing his rifle and professed his conviction that he perceived footsteps traversing the wind. Matthew directed him to maintain steadfast composure, though his vocal tone carried diminished authority. I remained positioned with my rifle across my lap, directing my attention into the darkness where the dog's eyes reflected faint illumination from firelight. The sound arrived subsequently, deliberate, measured footsteps crunching through snow, pausing, then progressing further. They circumnavigate our position, just beyond our visual range. The smell intensified with each pause, as though whatever traversed that space was awaiting our acknowledgement. No individual articulated any communication. We listened until the sound became absorbed by the storm. The smell lingered substantially longer, heavily present within our throats. We achieved minimal sleep. At dawn, the sky presented gray and low characteristics, and snow descended in substantial flakes that dampened every sound. We distributed feed to the dogs rapidly, completed our packing procedures, and advanced without extended conversation. The plain extended broadly. The horizon dissolved into whiteness. Every step carried the conviction that something proceeded behind us, positioned outside our visual perception. I glanced backward repeatedly, yet the trail exhibited only our sledges and the paw prints of the dogs. By midday, we reached a stand of black spruce rising from the snow like defensive stakes. The ground descended. The trees consolidated with exceptional density. Wappen instructed us to proceed with minimal sound. He offered no supplementary commentary, yet his visual attention never abandoned the shadows between the trunks. The atmosphere in that location possessed a distinctly altered quality, still and heavy, producing no bird vocalizations or wind sounds. The dogs minimized their tail positions, their progress slowing until it required actual pulling effort to maintain their advancement. We traversed the grove in complete silence, each individual monitoring a distinct direction, positioned approximately halfway through. Jules ceased movement and elevated his hand in warning. Upon a tree positioned to his right, the bark had been stripped to considerable elevation beyond his reach. The wood torn and fractured, the gouges penetrated deeply, intersecting one another in extended, irregular lines. Fresh snow adhered to the edges, providing evidence that these marks had been produced recently. Kerr's facial coloration became distinctly pale, and he declined to direct his vision toward the damage. Matthew directed us forward, yet his visual attention lingered upon the marks considerably longer than his verbal instruction permitted. We progressed in the grove into a shallow basin, its perimeter delineated by elevated ridges. The wind had swept the snow thin in this location, exposing patches of bare rock and solid ice. We commenced crossing toward the far side, yet before reaching that destination, the dogs froze completely. They pulled with extreme tension upon their traces and commenced whining with distress intensity. Their bodies faced forward, their ears pinned in place, their tails rigidly extended. Ahead, positioned near the ridge's base, something stood. It was tall, substantially taller than any human entity. Its frame was gaunt, the limbs excessively extended. The shoulders assumed a hunched posture. Its head was narrow, bearing antlers that twisted upward resembling fractured branches. The skin possessed a gray quality, stretched with visible tension across the underlying bone structure. I could not perceive its optical organs, detecting only dark depressions set profoundly within the skull. It maintained absolute stillness, the snow drifting around its form, its body remaining completely unmoving whilst the storm circled past. No individual articulated any communication. Jules elevated his rifle, Yet Wappen struck the barrel downward with force before any discharge could occur. His voice maintained a low register, but possessed considerable sharpness. He stated with absolute certainty, should we produce any discharge, none of us would maintain vitality sufficient to abandon this basin. Matthew directed his complete attention upon the figure, his respiration accelerating notably. Kerr articulated that it appeared to be a man subjected to starvation beyond rational comprehension. However, the words trembled significantly within his mouth. The figure did not progress toward us. It merely maintained its position and observed us with unwavering attention. The smell reached us subsequently, intensified beyond all previous manifestations, saturating every individual breath with decomposition and metallic scents. The dogs produced prolonged howls and snapped frantically at their restraints. The figure tilted its head with deliberate slowness, then rotated its body. It proceeded into the ridge, penetrating into the dark line of trees, and disappeared completely from our perception. We did not pursue. We did not articulate any communication. Matthew issued the directive to advance, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. We circumnavigated the basin, using considerable distance, hauling the sledges across stone where the runners produced harsh, screeching sounds. The dogs pulled with desperate intensity, eager to distance themselves from that location. My hands trembled with sufficient intensity that I could barely maintain my grip upon the traces. We established camp that evening in a hollow position considerable distance from the basin. No individual consumed substantial quantities. The meat carried a foul taste within my mouth, though I recognized absolutely that the composition remained unchanged from preceding meals. Jules produced repeated profanities beneath his respiration, as though linguistic expression could maintain his courage from complete dissolution. Kerr remained positioned apart, clutching the letter packet as though it possessed protective properties. Matthew patrolled the fire's periphery, rifle in hand, whilst Wappen positioned himself in the darkness beyond the illumination, listening intently. When sleep finally arrived, it remained superficial. I woke repeatedly, each occasion accompanied by absolute conviction that I had detected footsteps positioned beyond our canvas covering. On one instance, I perceived the smell again, positioned in such proximity that it seemed something leaned directly over our camp. The dogs winded but did not produce audible barking. In the faint light preceding dawn, I observed tracks impressed into the snow positioned approximately 10 paces from the fire. They circumnavigated us, using considerable distance, subsequently trailing back into the trees. We advanced with exceptional rapidity that morning. Nobody desired to remain in that location. The landscape became increasingly severe, the ridges more pronounced, the trees progressively sparse. The cold deepened until the atmosphere itself burned within the lungs. We communicated minimally, each individual confined within his personal silence. The dogs, nonetheless, produced low vocalization, pulling with increased urgency as though attempting to outpace whatever pursued us. By midday, we achieved another lake, frozen with solid integrity, the distant shore delineated by dark spruce forest. We traversed in a direct line, the sledges skimming with remarkable velocity. The ice grown beneath us, extended cracks propagating beneath the surface. Yet we persisted. Positioned approximately midway across, I directed my attention backward. Upon the adjacent shore, positioned at the forest periphery, it stood again, maintaining its unwavering observation. The antlers appeared black against the snow, the body sharp and attenuated. The smell carried even across the extensive frozen distance, faint yet absolutely certain. I grasped the sledge rope with increased tension and deliberately redirected my visual attention away. I did not permit myself to look backward again until we achieved the distant shore. By that juncture, the figure had disappeared completely. That evening, we produced substantially greater fire than our fuel supplies genuinely permitted, though this decision left us with reduced resources for subsequent days. The flames roared upward, projecting light into the elevated tree canopy. Nevertheless, nobody experienced genuine security. Wappen articulated in a composed manner that certain entities inhabiting the northern regions did not voluntarily relinquish their pursuit once a particular trail had been selected. He observed that it was not hunger exclusively that propelled them, but rather something considerably more ancient and fundamental. Matthew inquired what measures we might undertake. Waupun provided no response. He simply remained positioned and listened to the encompassing darkness. We maintained sleeping arrangements in successive rotations, each individual waking abruptly with absolute conviction that he detected respiration positioned just beyond the fire's reach. The snow returned before dawn, initially soft, subsequently descending with considerable heaviness, falling in substantial flakes that progressively enclosed the world surrounding us. We completed our camp procedures with remarkable speed, maintaining the fire at minimal intensity and permitting it to expire without ceremonial acknowledgement. The dogs strained frantically upon their traces the moment the sledges were positioned for transport. They craved distance with palpable intensity, and our collective desire aligned completely with their instinctive imperative. The storm intensified throughout the morning hours. The trail vanished beneath accumulating snow, and the ridges blurred into white obstruction. We progressed in single-file formation, each individual pursuing the back of his predecessor. My extremities felt encumbered, every step requiring concentrated effort, perspiration congealing beneath my parka. The wind pressed the crystalline particles into my facial region until visual perception became profoundly compromised on one occasion. I imagined perceiving something advancing with us, positioned just outside my visual range, a snow-crunching sound that was distinctly not our own production. I rotated deliberately, yet the storm obscured everything behind us. By midday, we achieved another spruce stand. The snow here was profound and heavy upon the branches. The dogs ceased progression, their respiration labored, their breaths suspended in substantial clouds. Matthew directed that we halt our movement. We distributed rations to the teams and consumed strips of frozen meat, whilst remaining within the tree's shelter. Kerr's hands trembled with sufficient severity that he permitted his knife to fall twice. Jules directed profanity at him with instruction to maintain steadfast composure. Yet his vocal tone carried no genuine force. Waupun conducted a complete circuit around the stand's perimeter, examining the treeline with careful attention, his facial expression entirely impassive. Upon his return, he instructed us to persist in our forward progress until darkness descended. He stated unequivocally that the storm would not provide us concealment. We abandoned the stand and advanced further. The snow diminished as evening approached, exposing the land muffled and silent. The environment appeared clean to visual perception, yet it carried a wrongness that transcended mere aesthetic consideration, as though something had been deliberately concealed rather than naturally erased. The dogs pulled with increased urgency, their ears positioned backward, their eyes darting toward the extending shadows accompanying the descending light. When the solar orb descended, we halted at the edge of a frozen creek bed. We constructed a minimal fire utilizing whatever we could acquire, though the ground remained exposed. Minimal shelter existed beyond a scatter of diminutive willows. The illumination felt inadequate against the encroaching darkness. That evening proved substantially more severe than preceding ones. The smell returned with considerable density and sour characteristics, rolling across our camp until each breath became saturated with its presence. The dogs whined and clawed at the snow, endeavoring to burrow beneath its surface. Subsequently, we perceived it. A prolonged cry, identical to previous instances, ascending to considerable elevation until sound fragmented into something profoundly harsh. It traversed the trees positioned closer than any previous manifestation. The men froze, each individual gripping his rifle with desperate intensity. Kerr articulated prayers repeatedly, his lips trembling noticeably. Jules released profanity and recommended that we discharge our weapons into the darkness, yet Matthew interrupted the suggestion, observing that exhausted ammunition would produce no beneficial outcome. Waupun remained motionless, his head lowered as though perceiving something positioned beyond the vocalization's reach. When the sound terminated, he articulated solely that we should refrain from physical movement until daylight achieved sufficient intensity. The night proved impossibly protracted. Each occasion when I closed my optical organs, I woke to the sound of steps circumnavigating our camp, slow, deliberate, and heavy. On one instance, I believe I perceived the shape position of the firelight's periphery. tall and attenuated, antlers capturing faint luminescence before fading into the tree cover. I articulated to myself that this represented merely shadow and smoke, yet the smell intensified subsequently, achieving unprecedented density. At dawn, we discovered the evidence. The tracks pressed profoundly into the snow, dimensions exceeding any human's, extended beyond any bear's capability. They circumnavigated our camp twice, subsequently cutting back into the timber. The dogs declined food consumption, pulling frantically upon their restraints and producing whines. Jules directed his attention toward the tracks, his jaw rigid, his eyes notably expanded. Kerr articulated absolutely nothing, maintaining his head in downward position. Matthew directed our movement with pronounced verbal sharpness, his previous composure entirely absent. We marched with considerable intensity throughout the morning hours, every individual bent toward the traces. The snow had diminished, exposing a pale, featureless sky. The atmosphere burned within my lungs with each breath. Behind us, the trail extended visibly clear, and I could not refrain from repeatedly glancing rearward. By midday, we achieved elevated ground, the trees diminishing into modest scrub vegetation. The wind returned, cutting with noticeable force across the ridge. From that location, I observed the extensive plain behind us. For a solitary moment, I believed I perceived it, tall, maintaining absolute stillness at the spruce formation's periphery, observing. We established camp before darkness descended, positioning ourselves against the side of a rocky outcrop. The stone provided minimal shelter, yet it surpassed completely exposed ground. We constructed 2 fire positions, one at each camp extremity, attempting to distribute illumination broadly. The meat produced powerful boiling vapors, yet nobody consumed substantial quantities. Kerr remained positioned apart, clutching the letter packet as though it possessed protective capabilities. Jules articulated that should the entity approach again, he would discharge his weapon regardless of Waupin's directives. Matthew directed him to maintain steadfast control, or he would personally ensure compliance. The words possessed weight, yet I perceived fear within his optical organs equally. When night descended, the fires roared with considerable intensity, yet the darkness felt considerably closer than previously. I maintained watch with Jules. The wind produced hissing sounds through the rocks, conveying the smell faintly initially, subsequently with progressive intensity. My throat contracted with the odor, my digestive system producing adverse reactions. Jules grasped his rifle with such force that his knuckle projections exhibited white coloration. He articulated in hushed tones that it positioned itself adjacent, that he could perceive its respiration. I articulated directive for him to maintain composure. Yet before I could complete this instruction, the cry fragmented the night. It positioned itself closer than ever previously, ascending elevated above the ridge, descending low until the ground itself seemed to undergo tremulous movement. The dogs produced extreme agitation, snapping and pulling with their howls, intersecting the cry with terrible intensity. The men achieved vertical position simultaneously, rifles elevated, positioned at the firelight's periphery. Shapes produced movement. They were tall, attenuated, positioned just beyond direct perception, slipping between shadow and illumination. The smell rolled across us with choking intensity, thick with decomposition and frigid scents. My hands trembled with such severity that the rifle felt excessively burdensome, my respiration sharp within my thoracic cavity. Jules elevated his firearm, his digit position upon the mechanical trigger, his optical organs notably expanded. Subsequently, from the surrounding darkness, a figure stepped into closer proximity. It was tall, antlers twisted in profoundly unnatural configuration, its optical organs resembling deep pits. It advanced with deliberate slowness until the firelight illuminated its facial region. The skin possessed a gray quality, stretched and tensioned, the mouth achieving an excessively wide configuration, teeth jagged and pointed. It maintained position at the firelight's edge, its shadow extending extensively across the snow, its head tilting from side to side as though conducting measurement of our collective entity. The smell thickened until each respiration approximated inhaling spoiled blood. The dogs pulled with such desperation that the sledges shifted against the surrounding rocks. Jules elevated his rifle, yet Waupin advanced with rapid movement. striking the barrel downward with force. He articulated with measured precision. No discharge possesses a capacity to repel it, only to facilitate its closer approach. His vocal tone maintained steadfast qualities, yet his optical attention never abandoned the figure. Matthew directed that we feed the fires with maximum fuel supplies. We produced substantial loads of whatever combustible materials we possessed. The flames ascended, projecting sparks into the encompassing darkness. The figure did not reverse its position. It persisted, position half illuminated, half shadowed, its respiration producing vapor within the atmosphere despite producing no audible sound. Its extremities produced periodic twitching movements, as though hunger exerted physical pressure upon them. Subsequently, without preceding notification, it advanced. One extended stride, then another. The firelight illuminated its complete corporeal form. It was profoundly gaunt, bone projections sharp beneath stretched skin, ribs resembling bars. Its appendages extended low, the terminal portions bearing claw-like structures black against the surrounding snow. The antlers rose with twisted, irregular configuration, producing scraping sounds as they contacted overhead vegetation. The dogs produced prolonged howls, snapping their restraining lines with desperation. Kerr descended to his knees, clutching the letter packet with extreme force, articulating words no individual present could comprehend. Jules elevated his rifle again, optical organs widely expanded, his dentition clenched with apparent force. Before any discharge could occur, Wappen advanced with dramatic speed. His articulation emerged in his individual language, the words sharp and commanding, resembling directives issued to meteorological phenomenon. He extended both appendages, the palms facing upward, his vocal projection ascending in rhythmic patterning that intersected to the dog's sounds and wind's pressure. The figure ceased its approach, its head tilting as though directing attention toward the articulation, the dark, pit-like organs fixed upon him completely. The smell achieved such density that I produced gagging sound behind my scarf. The entity bent with slight inclination, its thoracic cavity ascending and descending through slow, labored heaving motions. Subsequently, it produced a sound, low, rattling groan that produced aching sensations within my optical structure. It did not execute accelerated approach. It circumnavigated with deliberate step-by-step movement, maintaining position just beyond the fire's illumination. The dogs rotated frantically, their straining lines becoming intertwined, their optical organs demonstrating wild appearance. We rotated alongside it, our firearms positioned at readiness, our respiration measured with difficulty, our cardiac function accelerated beyond normal parameters. Each occasion approached the firelight's vicinity. It ceased its progression, establishing ocular contact through its hollow optical apparatus, subsequently resuming its circumnavigation. The circular movement achieved progressively reduced diameter. Jules articulated repeated profanity beneath his respiration, elevating his rifle repeatedly. This occasion, Matthew did not implement preventative measures. He discharged his weapon. The report fractured the encompassing night. Smoke burst from the implement's terminus, the acoustic reflection rolling across the ridge's expanse. The figure jerked with singular motion, its shoulder mechanism snapping backward. Momentarily, I believed it would undergo collapse, yet it maintained its vertical position. It rotated its head with deliberate slowness, its optical apparatus descending deeper, the groaning sound ascending to increased volume. Subsequently, it executed lunging movement with such rapidity that I barely perceived its motion. The dogs produced screaming vocalizations, snapping their restraints with extreme force. Jules underwent backward tumbling, fumbling with reloading procedures. Matthew directed that we maintain formation. I discharged without implementing targeting calculations. My projectile penetrated its thoracic cavity, yet it persisted in its advance. It traversed the smoke, its claw appendages manifesting in the firelight with sharpened appearance. Wappen articulated again, his volume exceeding previous attempts. His words cut with particular acuity, his appendages elevated to maximum height. The Wendigo demonstrated deceleration. For a singular breath interval, it achieved absolute stillness, its thoracic cavity undergoing heaving movement, vapor ascending from the projectile impact locations. Subsequently, it produced scream, A sound so acute it penetrated through bone and biological tissue. A sound that manifested itself as causing the fires to whip as though the atmospheric pressure itself had produced reversal. The dogs broke free from their restraints, dispersing into the surrounding darkness. The sledges underwent inversion, releasing meat and equipment across the snow surface. Kerr permitted the letter packet to descend from his appendages, his hands trembling with excessive intensity for maintenance of the item. The Wendigo rotated its head one additional moment, establishing ocular contact with each individual participant sequentially before advancing backward into the darkness. Its physical manifestation faded into the tree coverage, the smell trailing subsequent to it until the atmospheric composition achieved cleanliness one additional time. Only the firelights crackling and the men's labored respiration remained. We remained positioned, our firearms maintained in readiness, our cardiac functions undergoing rapid pulsation, anticipating its return. However, it did not materialize that evening. When dawn ascended, the ground provided truthful narrative. The snow position beyond the fire illumination exhibited churned appearance. Profound prints circling with restricted diameter. Blood marked the trail, where our projectiles had achieved intersection. Dark manifestation against the white backdrop. The dogs had dispersed into the timber, apparently beyond our location or recovery capacity. Matthew articulated with hoarse vocal quality. We require movement. There existed no space for doubt or extended deliberation within his statement. Waupun executed collection of the dispersed meat utilizing steady appendages, his optical attention fixed upon the tree lean's distant position. Kerr executed recovery of the letter packet from its position within the snow, his hands continuing to produce tremulous movement. Jules articulated no verbal communication whatsoever. We executed securing of whatever material we possessed capacity to transport through attachment to the sledges, subsequently advancing on foot, producing personal hauling effort with the runners. The trail position before us manifested considerably increased difficulty. The weight upon our shoulders achieved greater density than previously experienced. Each step produced the absolute knowledge that our pursuer persisted in following, positioned with patience, consuming hunger, maintaining observation. We executed dragging of the sledges through exhausting labor, the harness straps producing deep penetration into our shoulders, every step appearing heavier than the preceding one. The snow maintained firm surface characteristics, yet each instance the runners encountered buried ice. The consequent jolt produced pulling force until I believed my appendages might achieve separation from my corporeal entity. No individual articulated any communication. Even Jules, who consistently produced profanity beneath his respiration, advanced through an environment of complete silence. The singular audible manifestations consisted of runners scraping and respiratory sounds. The solar illumination presented weak characteristics that day, manifesting barely as a pale disk behind thin cloud composition. By midday hours, the cold bit with such intensity that I could not achieve digital sensation within my extremities. We ceased movement solely for duration necessary to consume frozen meat strips and swallow snow. Kerr advanced with a letter packet clutched with extreme tension beneath his outer garment, his optical attention fixed upon forward positioning exclusively. Matthew propelled us with intensity exceeding previous exertions, his facial composure rigid. Though I perceived fear within his optical apparatus, each instance his attention directed toward the tree lean. Waupun persisted with lead positioning, his forward motion pace remaining steady, his head orientation continuing to rotate in auditory exploration. During afternoon hours later segment, we achieved a ridge position that presented overview of a frozen valley. The wind produced strong pressure at this location, achieving snow sweeping that produced gleaming ice appearance beneath. Waupun ceased his progression and elevated his appendage in cautionary gesture. Positioned within the valley, adjacent to a spruce line, the figure remained stationary again. It was tall, gaunt, antlers twisted in its characteristically unnatural configuration, the gray corporeal form remaining still as stone manifestation. The distance separating us from the entity extended broadly, yet the smell carried faint and sour quality, perceptible despite the distance magnitude. None of us produced any movement. My respiration achieved sharp cessation within my thoracic cavity, the cold atmospheric composition burning, as I maintained absolute stillness. Jules grasped his rifle, Yet Matthew produced head-shaking negation prior to any elevation execution. We remained positioned until the figure tilted its head backward in slow motion as though investigating the atmospheric composition, subsequently descending into the tree's shadow before disappearing entirely. We did not traverse that valley. Waupun directed our progression along the ridge's elevated pathway instead. Though the climb achieved near-breaking intensity of our collective effort, the sledges produced scraping sounds and experienced overturning events, dispersing equipment. We did not execute reversal motion or equipment recovery. By the moment we achieved the distant side, the luminescence had diminished substantially and the wind cut with increased severity. We discover a hollow position adjacent to a rock formation line and establish camp with exhaustion as primary motivation. The fires produce weak burning manifestation. We possess minimal wood supplies, and the environmental elements had subjected our discovered fuel to moisture saturation. That evening, the smell returned with intensity exceeding all previous manifestations. It permeated through our camp position, enveloping the fires, until every respiration became saturated with its presence. The dogs had disappeared, yet I perceived howling at significant distance. Thin, irregular sounds, entirely inconsistent with typical wolf vocalizations. Kerr underwent psychological rupture. He permitted the letter packet to descend into the snow and clutched his head with both appendages, oscillating his upper body in back and forth motions, producing articulations incoherent to our collective comprehension. Matthew executed physical contact with his shoulders, delivering vigorous shaking movements, directing him to maintain vertical posture. Kerr merely directed his attention past Matthew into the encompassing darkness, his optical organs appearing vacant and depthless. Jules recommended abandonment of the individual, articulating his conviction that Kerr had already undergone complete dissolution. Waupun articulated no verbal communication. He supplied supplementary fuel to the fire manifestation, his facial expression demonstrating hardened qualities, his optical attention directed outward with absolute fixation. The cry produced manifestation after the midnight hour. It fractured the atmosphere similar to a knife edge, extended and particularly shrill, descending into rumbling that produced tremor-like manifestations within the ground beneath us. My thoracic cavity achieved severe tension, my appendages grasping the rifle with force sufficient for stock to produce pressure-induced marking upon my palm structure. Shapes manifested at the fire illumination's periphery, tall and attenuated, slipping between tree placement and stone surface. One advanced with greater proximity, its antlers capturing faint illumination. Its optical apparatus achieved faint glow manifestation. Deep pit structures rimmed with dull red coloration. Jules discharged his implement without awaiting direction. The report produced sharp manifestation. Smoke achieved explosive emission. The shape demonstrated staggering movement, yet failed to achieve collapse. It produced scream manifestation, the acoustic phenomenon tearing the atmospheric composition, and advanced with lunging execution. Matthew discharged subsequent to this. Subsequently, I achieved firearm utilization. The projectile achieved penetration into its thoracic cavity, yet the entity persisted in its advancement with claw appendages achieving extended manifestation. Waupun articulated in his individual language once additional moment, his vocal projection exceeding previous intensity, achieving elevation in rhythmic patterning that intersected to the chaos existing around us. Momentarily, the figure achieved deceleration manifestation. Subsequently, it executed backward acceleration into the encompassing darkness, permitting the smell to produce extensive lingering manifestation. We maintained our firearm positioning until our appendages produced shaking manifestation, achieving excessive intensity, awaiting the subsequent assault event, yet no such manifestation materialized. The shape formations faded into the tree cover, the howl sounds drifting across the ridge expansion with progressive distance diminishment. The smell maintained persistent heavy characteristics. When morning finally achieved its arrival, the tracks achieved ubiquitous positioning. They surrounded camp, penetrated our established trail, achieved penetration into snow manifestation with profound characteristics. Blood-marked locations where projectile impacts had achieved manifestation, yet the quantity insufficient for wound manifestation that should produce comprehensive termination. We executed rapid packing procedures. Advancing before the solar manifestation achieved substantial elevation. Kerr achieved tumbling, his psychological entity broken, his physical form weakened. Matthew executed restraint attachment to a sledge to facilitate dragging execution when he achieved collapse manifestation. Jules articulated that circumstance achieved hopelessness manifestation, yet no individual achieved verbal response. We advanced, each step achieving progressive slowness, each respiration manifestation achieving increased heaviness. By evening, the landscape achieved opening into diminished elevation hills, the trees progressively achieving reduction. Waupun articulated that Pike Lake positioning achieved proximity manifestation. No extended duration and singular days should pressing acceleration achieve manifestation. Hope achieved flickering manifestation within my psychological entity, faint yet achieving penetrating intensity. We established camp positioning within a shallow draw configuration, the fires producing bright manifestation, utilizing whatever with minimal quantity we could achieve gathering. The men achieved huddle positioning, excessive fatigue preventing verbal communication manifestation. Kerr maintained recumbent positioning, his optical apparatus directed toward the sky configuration. That evening hours achieved profound silence manifestation. The fire achieved diminished positioning, the men undergoing sleep manifestation. The smell achieved thick manifestation, its intensity exceeding all previous manifestations to such degree that it achieved choking manifestation, producing my waking event. I achieved vertical positioning, rifle firmly positioned within my appendages, and perceived it maintaining camp position edge manifestation, tall, gaunt, antlers twisted, optical apparatus appearing as pit manifestation. It advanced with slow, deliberate movement until firelight illumination achieved facial contact. The mouth achieved opening manifestation, wide configuration extreme, rows of dentition jagged and pointed. Respiration achievement producing vapor manifestation within the cold. I achieved frozen positioning, my physical entity locked absolutely. Subsequently, Waupun's vocal articulation achieved manifestation behind me. Sharp, commanding, the word steady and producing great intensity. The Wendigo achieved pause manifestation, its head tilting, the red-eye luminescence achieving diminishment manifestation. Waupun achieved advancement manifestation, his appendages elevated, his chant manifestation filling the night environment. The figure underwent shudder manifestation singular occasion, subsequently achieved rotation manifestation. It advanced backward into the dark, the smell trailing subsequent to its position achievement, until the atmospheric composition, once additional occasion, achieved cleanliness manifestation. At dawn progression, Pike Lake achieved positioning before us, its frozen surface extending broadly. The outpost manifestation, a faint smoke line positioning at the distant shore. We achieved stumbling across, executing sledge dragging manifestation. Our corporeal forms achieving weakness manifestation, but persisting in vitality manifestation. Upon reaching the post positioning, the gates achieved opening. Voices achieved articulation manifestation. Appendages achieved pulling manifestation directing us internal positioning. Warmth achieved facial surface contact manifestation. With smoke scent and food aroma achieved olfactory achievement. I achieved ascending to my knee positioning, permitting the rifle to achieve ground contact. We never achieved visual manifestation of the entity occurrence subsequent to that evening hour. Yet certain evenings, when the atmospheric conditions achieve stillness and the snow positioning achieves profound depth, I perceive the scent, faint and sour, as though it maintains patient positioning in that wilderness location, achieving continuous circulation, maintaining observational manifestation, never releasing its pursuit grasp regarding the trail it had selected. The account which I have articulated herein remains accurate in every particular detail, though I recognize absolutely profound difficulty many individuals will experience in accepting such narrative comprehensively. The 5 men who participated in that expedition achieved emergence in the frozen territory alive, yet our psychological entities underwent alteration from which we never achieved complete recovery manifestation. Matthew persisted in his employment with the company for 3 additional years before his psychological condition achieved such deterioration that a continued service became impossible manifestation. He relocated to Montreal, where he maintained residence in a residential facility specializing in individuals afflicted with profound nervous conditions. During the singular occasion I achieved the opportunity to observe him subsequent to our expedition, his optical apparatus possessed that identical distant quality, as though perceiving something positioned just beyond my visual range capacity. Jules ceased his employment with the fur trading enterprise following the year succeeding our ordeal. He relocated toward the Southern Territories, establishing residence in a community removed considerable distance from the northern forests. Yet on infrequent occasions when I encountered him in subsequent years, he possessed an unmistakable manner of listening, his head achieving tilting positioning, his attention seemingly directed toward distant sound sources entirely imperceptible to others' auditory capacity. Kerr's psychological dissolution proved considerably more severe. The letter packet, which he had clutched with such desperation during our journey, produced profound psychological impact upon his entity. He achieved maintenance of position as clerk, though his performance quality deteriorated markedly. He would sit for extended periods, simply staring at the correspondence without achieving any actual examination or processing manifestation. Within 2 years of our expedition's termination, he achieved complete withdrawal from society, residing in a manner approaching hermitage within a remote village. The letters he had risked his existence to deliver never achieved complete transmission. They remained within his possession until his death manifestation achieved occurrence. Waupun returned to his community with minimal additional commentary regarding our experience. He maintained his employment as guide and hunter for the company for several additional years before achieving retirement from active service. Upon the singular occasion I achieved the opportunity to speak with him significantly subsequent to our expedition, he provided observation that certain entities existing in the Northern Territories achieved neither life manifestation in the conventional comprehension nor death manifestation comparable to human understanding. He articulated that they represented something positioned between entities sustained by hunger, by rage, by the profound isolation and brutality that characterized those frozen regions. He stated in his characteristic measured manner that the entity we had encountered would persist in that territory, patient and eternal, awaiting its subsequent opportunity. He suggested that our survival represented not an absolute victory, but rather a temporary reprieve. Whether this represented his genuine conviction or merely the philosophical reflection of someone traumatized beyond conventional recovery, I achieved no definitive conclusion manifestation. I persisted in maintaining my employment with the Hudson's Bay Company for numerous additional years, achieving promotion to positions of increased responsibility and administrative authority. Yet I never volunteered for expeditions directing attention northward. The other officers eventually ceased extending such invitations, perceiving my reluctance as something more profound and simple aversion to the harsh environmental conditions. During the decades that have transpired since that winter of 1823, I have attempted numerous times to produce comprehensive understanding regarding what we genuinely encountered during our journey northward. The rational components of my intellect suggest multiple conventional explanations: starvation-induced psychological manifestations, misinterpretation of environmental phenomena, the tendency of fear to distort perception and memory accuracy. Yet no such rational framework achieves sufficient explanatory capacity regarding the physical evidence we observed. The tracks in the snow possess genuine three-dimensional manifestation. The torn bark upon the trees achieved genuine damage beyond what psychological suggestion could produce. The bullets achieved genuine penetration into flesh and tissue. What remains genuinely inexplicable centers upon the entity's apparent invulnerability to our projectiles. We discharged our firearms multiple times at direct proximity, achieving unquestionable impact manifestation. Yet the creature persisted in its advancement with undimmed intensity. I have consulted with individuals possessing medical expertise, and they remain unable to provide comprehensive explanation regarding what biological characteristics might permit such resistance to ballistic trauma. In the years subsequent to my retirement from active company service, I have maintained considerable private correspondence with scholars and antiquarians possessing specialized knowledge regarding indigenous folklore and the traditional accounts preserved within the territories. Native populations. Their communications consistently reference narratives remarkably analogous to our experience. Descriptions of entities designated through various linguistic traditions all possessing shared characteristics. The Wendigo represents merely the Anishinaabe designation for what multiple indigenous cultures acknowledge as genuine threat, genuine entity worthy of profound respect and apprehension. The creature which pursued us achieved manifestation not as supernatural phenomenon in the conventional sense, not as spirit or phantom existing in dimensions beyond material reality. Rather, it represented something positioned within the natural world, yet operating according to principles we do not adequately comprehend. It achieved hunger manifestation that transcended mere sustenance acquisition. The indigenous scholars suggest that such entities achieve creation through psychological and spiritual rupture precipitated by extreme environmental conditions and a profound desperation that accompanies starvation and isolation. Whether this represents literal metamorphosis of human consciousness into something other, or whether it indicates genuine biological entity distinct from conventional human manifestation, I have never achieved definitive personal certainty manifestation. What remains indisputable centers upon the absolute reality of the threat itself and the psychological devastation it inflicted upon every participant who encountered it directly. The letter packet which Kurt protected with such desperation throughout our journey eventually achieved delivery to Pike Lake subsequent to our safe arrival at the outpost. The gentleman for whom it was destined, a company official who had suffered the loss of his son to fever, eventually achieved knowledge of our harrowing experience. He expressed gratitude that the correspondence from his family had achieved successful transmission despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding its delivery manifestation. Yet this individual also achieved articulation of belief that perhaps the correspondence represented insufficient compensation for the psychological and spiritual consequences that our expedition team had sustained. He observed that in attempting to maintain connection with loved ones positioned at considerable distance, we had purchased that connection through encounter with something fundamentally inimical to human existence and well-being. In the years subsequent to my retirement from the fur trading enterprise, I have achieved sustained effort toward documentation of our experience in comprehensive narrative form, not for purposes of sensationalism or dramatic effect, but rather produce permanent record of events that appear to defy conventional explanation. I have attempted to approach the account with the discipline of factual documentary rather than romantic exaggeration. Every detail I have articulated represents genuine occurrence according to my precise memory manifestation and consistent corroborating accounts that the other survivors provided when opportunity permitted extended discussion. Yet I remain acutely conscious of the fundamental inadequacy of language itself in conveying the psychological impact of such experience. No arrangement of words achieves complete capacity to communicate the absolute terror standing at firelight's edge, observing something that should not possess existence manifestation, recognizing that conventional defensive mechanisms achieve complete ineffectiveness against an entity that operated according to principles entirely distinct from human comprehension. The smell achieves lingering presence within my memory manifestation, this perhaps representing the most persistent element of the entire experience. Physical appearance achieves gradual diminishment within recollection. Details become indistinct. Proportions shift with the passage of time, yet the smell maintains unwavering precision. I experience periodic manifestation of phantom odors, particularly during the winter months, that produce absolute conviction regarding its proximity despite complete absence of rational foundation for such conviction. On certain evenings, when the atmospheric conditions achieve perfect stillness and the snow positioning achieves appropriate depth and characteristics, I achieve venture to my residence exterior positioning and remain in stillness, my auditory attention directed toward the distance. During such occasions, I experience profound certainty that I perceive something moving at the perceptual threshold, shapes that achieve only partial definition before they disperse into the encompassing darkness once more. My colleagues and acquaintances attribute such manifestations to the advancing age of my physical form and the accompanying decline of sensory precision. Yet I maintain absolute knowledge that these manifestations represent not hallucination or psychological deterioration, but rather something positioned somewhere between genuine perception and psychological memory reinforcement, a phenomenon I cannot adequately categorize according to conventional understanding. I have achieved establishment of considerable financial resources throughout my commercial career, sufficient to permit the purchase of substantial property positioned far removed from the northern territories. My residence positions itself in comfortable southern location, surrounded by civilized society and conventional urban manifestations. Yet these geographic considerations achieve no meaningful prevention of periodic manifestations, wherein I achieve complete conviction regarding the entity's proximity and continued maintenance of its pursuit intention. Whether this represents genuine supernatural continuation or merely the profound psychological scarring that intense terror produces, I have achieved no definitive conclusion manifestation throughout the decades that have transpired. What remains certain centers upon the absolute reality of the entity we encountered and the devastating consequences of such experience upon the psychological well-being of every individual participant in that fateful expedition. I have achieved numerous occasions during which I considered whether perhaps we should have discharged our firearms with deliberate intention to achieve our own termination rather than permit ourselves to experience the entity's direct contact. I have achieved contemplation regarding whether the other survivors achieved similar considerations and perhaps achieved acting upon such impulses, thus explaining their subsequent withdrawal from society and conventional productive manifestations. In my declining years, I have achieved increasing certainty that the greatest act of mercy fate could produce would involve the achievement of my consciousness dissolution through death manifestation prior to any circumstance requiring me to return toward those northern territories. The possibility of such requirement achieving manifestation, regardless of the rational improbability thereof, produces within me a dread that transcends conventional fear of mortality itself. The northernmost territories continue their existence, eternal, frozen, and fundamentally indifferent to human presence or comprehension. Somewhere within those vast expanses of frozen wilderness, I maintain complete conviction that the entity persists, maintaining its patient vigil, awaiting the opportunity to continue a pursuit of human prey that achieved escape through fortune and desperation rather than through any genuine capability to achieve permanent defeat of something so fundamentally opposed to human existence itself.